The Prime Minister has vowed to give the police more powers to stop activists climbing on war memorials. And it comes as Staffordshire Police have also warned that staff using words such as policeman, you couldn't make it up, could you, could now be breaking the law. Joining me now to discuss this is former Metropolitan Police Officer Peter Bleksley, former detective even, Peter.
And former policeman. I take no objection to that.
Well, don't you be breaking the law here on the show. We don't want the studio rush. Look, let's start with this war memorial. Absolutely appalling scenes on Wednesday night following the defeat of the ceasefire vote in Parliament. Are you seriously telling me that your former colleagues could not find one offence to prosecute someone for climbing on a war memorial covered in poppy breeze, making a political statement, a nationalistic, potentially, statement, waving a flag?
First of all, I have to say quite clearly that the person who climbed upon that great war memorial is an irresponsible, disrespectful piece of vermin, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But having poured through the Public Order Act and all its subsequent amendments and changes, and then its incorporation into other acts and vice versa, it's very difficult to find a neatly fitting piece of legislation. In other words, a specific offence. If somebody climbs a memorial, as distasteful as that is
there no trespass offence?
Well, trespass is a civil matter, generally speaking.
Okay.
And if they've got soft-soled shoes, for example, and they're really not damaging that memorial, then, of course, Criminal Damage Act does not apply. If, however, you could perhaps apply parts of the Public Order Act, but in order for that, there would have to be kind of like an enraged crowd who were taking extreme offence at what was going on.
Okay.
Or perhaps there was a crowd and the climbing of that monument might have created a breach of the peace, for example. There's legislation that might have fit had there been a different reaction from a crowd nearby.
So you tell me, Peter, what are these police officers doing then stood round the Cenotaph in Whitehall if there's nothing they can do to stop people going on the Cenotaph in Whitehall? There's a 24-hour-a-day guard at the moment on the Cenotaph. So what are they going to do? What are they there for?
Invariably, they would say they are protecting it from damage. Because let's remember, we've seen a war memorial this year damaged with spray paint, Free Palestine painted on it.
In Rochdale,
Yep, and we've seen the Cenotaph be attacked in the past. So they're probably saying they are there, not only to respect, of course, that solemn, wonderful piece of architecture, but also to prevent people from damaging it.
So if someone climbed on it, they couldn't intervene?
Oh, they could intervene, I think.
Because how can they intervene at the Cenotaph but not at the war memorial?
Because they could then say, well, who is present here? Is this behaviour likely to cause a breach of the peace? Are they going to outrage someone who is stood nearby? Would it then fall within the public order? Because so much of the Public Order Act and the breach of the peace legislation is dependent upon what might happen or what is being caused.
So I go back to my first question, just to push you on it. So they could act at the Cenotaph if the same thing happened at the Cenotaph. So they've been protesting in Parliament Square. If they'd have gone up from Parliament Square to the Cenotaph on Whitehall rather than the Memorial on Hyde Park Corner, the police could have acted, but they say they couldn't when they climbed up on Hyde Park Corner.
Yeah, I think we'll find that our police will overwhelmingly react if people start climbing war memorials.
Well, they were climbing war memorials, they did nothing.
Well, they did, and of course it was some considerable height that it was up there. And in this day of policing being so heavily polluted by the fluffiness and the wokeism. Well, the word woke runs through contemporary policing like the word Brighton runs through a stick of rock, unfortunately. And we do need to see robust policing as and when appropriate. And I completely agree with the Prime Minister here. If there's a gap that's been identified that needs to be plugged
by a specific
health and safety?
It doesn't sound health and safety. It gets everyone eventually. But it sounds like there isn't really a gap. Because what you're saying, it's just interesting. What you're saying is that you believe, I think you're right, by the way, you believe that the police would have intervened if it had been the Cenotaph. That's the whole point of having this 24-hour day, round-the-clock guard, huge draw on police resources. but they didn't intervene here. So we don't need new legislation. If they can intervene at the cenotaph, they could have intervened here. And this rather plays into the former Home Secretary's argument, I think, that there's a sort of, a partial approach to policing. They'll intervene in some cases, cenotaph, but not in others.
But it depends on the intent of the person as well. If they're intending to cause harassment, alarm, distress,
well, I
and
don't
those
think
kind of
anyone
things,
could see that footage.
That's where the minutiae is within the Public Order Act and all the subsequent legislation. I think here the Prime Minister has nailed it. There needs to be a specific offence of climbing, criminal trespass, for want of a better phrase, on a war memorial of any description. But then, of course, it'll have to be broken down. Does that include memorial gardens, for example? Most definitely, yes. If your local cricket club has got a memorial garden to former great players and volunteers, for example, would that be encapsulated within the legislation? The law is ever changing, the society changes, and it needs to evolve. And I think we probably need a specific offence here.
But also there's an issue, isn't there, in terms of breach of the peace, that it was those laws were written long before social media, and it may have been that there was nobody on the crowd who was taking offence in that, but millions of people were taking offence at home. So as you say, we need to think about how that works, because some of this is Victorian legislation, isn't it?
And breach of the peace obviously deals with intent. What is the intent of that person who is allegedly or apparently or actually committing a breach of the peace? It's why we saw the Met Police, thankfully, on Saturday when we had counter-protests, and they literally kettled about 100, 120 of the counter-protesters because they knew they were on their way for a tear-up. That seemed pretty kind of obvious. So they lined them up down both sides of the road, handcuffed a lot of them, and detained them there.
But, that while I absolutely agree that was the right thing to do, it does just play into this narrative that Suella Braverman was pushing about this partial policing. Look, on policing being ever-changing, we hear from Staffordshire Police. They've spent lots and lots of taxpayers' money, I'm sure, coming up with a new booklet of guidance that says you are potentially committing an offence. Not don't do it. You're potentially committing an offence to refer to someone as a policeman, or I guess as a policewoman, because it's gender binary. Surely they should just be getting on with arresting people, climbing on war memorials, rather than dealing with this sort of nonsense.
Wouldn't it be nice if our police were totally dedicated to patrolling the streets,
catching criminals,
investigating crime promptly and professionally when it happened, and locking up bad people, rather than this fluffy kind of nonsense? But this is a byproduct of when Tony Blair in 97 or thereabouts said education, education, education.
Yeah.
And all those smart, ambitious cops who didn't really like the front line of policing, all that rough and tumble on the pavement was a bit beneath them, right? They thought, right, off we go, university, we'll have a bit of that. And for the last 20 years or so, they have come back to senior policing, they've held the roles, they've been in charge, and of course they had their meeting in London this week, the police chiefs, and what they have done is applied so much of that pseudo-intellectual claptrap that their heads got filled with in university, they've applied it to policing. Well, a lot of policing can't be learnt in books.
Yeah.
And consequently, there is this disconnect from the public with the police, and it's why so much trust and confidence is just nosediving.
So tell me, I don't know. I haven't got the figures, but you will know. I mean, how much do you think someone is paid? I'll ask both of you. How much do you think someone is paid to come up with this booklet? What's their salary? Inclusion and diversity officer?
94,000?
I don't know. I don't know. But
that's the average for apparently.
What do you think the average punter wants? Someone to come up with a booklet saying it's deeply offensive to refer to someone as a policeman or woman or anything else, or to see another copper on the street where they live.
It's about common sense, isn't it? Yeah, look, if in official, literature, calling police officer, it's quicker than writing policeman and policewoman anyway. It's fewer letters, it's fine. If somebody uses policeman or policewoman as a colloquial term, the idea that it's a criminal offence is just daft.
They're not even saying we want to discourage it. They say you are committing a crime.
It's all communities want. So take the, Stephen Port, the murder that wasn't properly investigated in the gay community. People would much rather have a police force that's actually doing a better job of detection rather than, flip charts and equality and diversity, sort of tokenism. We don't want tokenism. Yeah. We want delivery.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's... I mean, what on earth are Staffordshire Police thinking? Now, I'm going to ask you, I'm guessing you're not going to be able to answer this question on television.
Peter can answer anything.
We are live. I presume policeman isn't the most offensive thing that you've been called in your career.
Rozza, filth, scum, busy.
Keep it clean, keep it clean.
You know, I've been called many, many things, and I wore them all as a badge of honour, and invariably my retort to it was, you're nicked.
Yeah, but apparently not now. For climbing on a warm mirror. You can't be nicked for that, but you can be. I wonder if we'll see anyone arrested for using the term policeman. I mean, that would
the key question is politically, will the new Home Secretary be calling the Chief Constable of Staffordshire today? Because Suella probably would have done.
Well, let's remember the Labour Party have vowed...
Well, they're all in London at the moment.
When the Labour Party get elected, they are going to bring in misgendering legislation. So if you misgender anyone, 2 years in prison. That's what's coming down the line should the Labour Party get elected.
I think that one maybe kicked into the long grass.
I think that might be a third-term issue for the Labour Party.